Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out insightsinsound.com for a full list of our podcasts and YouTube series.
My guest is Kevin Churko. He is an engineer, producer, the owner of the Hideout Studios here in technically Henderson, aka Las Vegas Outer Limits, something like that, right?
Yeah.
Let's dive into a little bit of your background first. Okay. You have done a whole lot of different stuff, even though you seem to be sort of labeled as a metal guy, but you've done like a lot of, Shania Twain. Who else did I see? Michael Bolton. Right? I mean, you've done a lot of
no one's ever brought that one up yet.
But it's on your website, dude. You know?
I mean, there's some interesting stuff I've done, not as producer, but as an engineer. I did Ringo Starr. I mean, nobody brings that one up.
I love Ringo.
Yeah. So, I didn't engineer the whole record. The guy on the job had to go somewhere for a week. They needed a guy to fill in. The producer, Mark Hudson, called me, and I went there and had a week of joy. And it was amazing. I think as an engineer, you get hired for whatever project you can or you're able to, depend on what producers you're in favor with. And so, say the Michael Bolton one was when I worked for producer Mutt Lang, and he was doing a Michael Bolton song, so I got inserted into that, which was amazing. So I think that back in the engineering days, I had maybe a little wider variety of artists and people I worked with. And then as I got into my own producer career, I mean, you have success with one thing.
And that's it.
And then
you're that guy.
All the rest of the people from that thing, that pyramid, let's call it, start calling. So, and at that time, as producer, as guy who wants to do that job, it's like I'm not picky. I just want a job. So you want to hire me now? Okay, let's do it. You want to hire me now? Okay, let's do it. And then eventually get to a point where maybe you have a little bit more choice. But by that time, you still don't really have a choice because they'll pay you this much amount of money to do what they expect you to do, or you can try to get your foot in the door in other places and not make that much money. So you have to be really passionate about it. And then, it becomes, well, the kids are going to possibly go to college, so I got to make sure I got that covered. And I want to buy this place, got to make sure I have that covered. And so it becomes a matter of, just anybody's life and anybody's career and choices. And now I'm really in a great position where I really can do the things I'm completely passionate about. And who knows where that's going to go. I mean, I encourage people to do that always. It shouldn't be, the more it's about the money, the less good it's going to be. So it should always be about the passion. And the money will take care of itself. And the money's irrelevant anyways, because if you're happy, what does the money mean? An extra zero doesn't mean anything. How happy are you? Are you waking up every day happy to be part of life, or are you not?
Yeah, and that goes well beyond the artistic aspect of it. That just, it's like, do I want to do this for the rest of my life? That kind of thing. Yeah. Do I want to wake up in the morning? Am I happy with what I'm doing?
Yes.
But if you think about it from the artist's perspective, it's the same thing. You become known for a certain type of music, a certain genre, and what do your fans want? What does the record label want? They want 2.0 of the same thing. There are very few artists like a Bowie, for example, who will be brave enough to come in and just
do
something.
Queen.
Yeah.
How many times did they change?
Exactly.
That was back in the day where I was just first starting to listen to music. You couldn't wait to hear the new album to see what they would do.
Yeah.
A band like Queen goes from pretty heavy first record to less heavy, more poppy, then no synths, then all of a sudden all synth. That's a pretty extreme. And then the combination thereof after that. But I think people were generally along for those rides, and people weren't as channeled or polarized as they are now.
Yeah.
And it's a blessing and a curse. A blessing because once you have the AC/DC brand on you, you're branded and you have that brand for the rest of your life, or you wear that brand for the rest of your life, right? And been very little change along that path. But I think in those days you weren't as connected. You would like Queen as much as you would like, Foreigner.
Right.
As much as you would
or
like
Black Sabbath,
Fleetwood Mac.
yeah, exactly.
As much as you would like, and all those bands kind of changed throughout time too. And it was really a journey in a sense, right? And that's what I thought about it then. But now, it seems like music these days is not just rock, but any kind of pop or anything. It seems like, once people know you're a thing, you're supposed to be that thing.
And also, the market itself, such as it is factioned, and really now you're forced to fit into even tighter and tighter little genre-specific areas, you know, and you're a hip-hop artist.
And you can now too, because you can release a song to everybody in the world all at the same time, and those people get it fed on their their Spotify because they like that particular kind of band. Whereas in the old days, you had to be in a magazine, you had to go on tour. It took them longer to find you.
Yeah.
And it took you longer to find your audience, so you kind of had to widen the net a little bit more, right? Just to work. Whereas now, you can if you want to do new age songs about aliens with 70s folk bent, you can probably find that somewhere.
That's probably a whole album right there.
Yeah, and it's probably a whole genre of that.
Yeah.
That you can find. Whereas before, how do you find that? So,
well, it's funny because you talk about bands like Queen, or an even better example, go back to the Beatles. Who the hell could have, the White Album, right? There's such a wide range of stuff on there. Yeah. No, a band these days couldn't get away with that.
I don't. Yeah, it would be very difficult to find a band that goes from "She Loves You, Yeah, Yeah, Yeah" to "Let It Be."
Right. To Revolution Number 9. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there's so many places that they went. And let's face it, some of it was related to drugs too. No drugs or little drugs, different drugs, psychedelic drugs.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
So not that we're going to probably go there, but
heavens no. But I do think it's interesting. It's funny. We were talking about a mutual friend, Michael Beinhorn, and I was giving him a hard time about this quite a while ago, actually. But we were talking about the first Material album. You familiar with that album?
No.
It's all over the map.
Okay.
There's a Whitney Houston tune in there. There's an Ozzy Osbourne tune in there. And we were laughing about the fact. I said, this is like a band in search of an identity, and I don't think that you can really get away with that anymore. Because people don't know where to put you in the...
No, because of the way music is marketed, too, in a sense. It's not just people that don't know what to do with it. It's like, you got your Instagram, and you got you got to have solid threads of content of one thing to attract the people that like that thing.
Yeah.
Whereas, you're so overloaded with who the artist is. The story, in a sense, story or not a story, the real life, it all has to make sense and have some continuity to it. Whereas I think, and even my early bands as a musician, were, four of us, we had two bands. We had a country band and a rock band, and we had two records out at the same time because we were just doing both, but we were just into music in general, and these songs fit into this kind of format, and these songs fit into this format, and we failed horribly because of it even then, because we didn't kind of have an identity. The music wasn't our identity. Music was our identity in general. Yeah. So we didn't feel we had to choose. But even at that time, people want to sign up to a program, and they want to, they're still signing up to a philosophy. And I think a guy like David Bowie, when you're talking about him, I mean, he was able to bring people through so many different things. Yeah. But it was still sort of an artsy pop rock thing.
It was, and I'm sure that he lost certain fans as he made these transitions, gained other ones and stuff like that. But that's you bring up social media. And social media, I think, has really kind of changed the game because all of a sudden now people really want to know you. Yeah. To know you personally, or at least feel that they have like almost ownership. Yeah. In a sense. And that's kind of, back before those days, you had, the only information that got out there was what your publicist allowed to get out there, the interviews, whatever. And now it's like you could get, all of a sudden, snapped on somebody's iPhone, and have a very, real moment, quote unquote, for better or worse.
Yeah.
And
most of the time worse.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and we could get into a whole rabbit hole there of what social media has done to our industry.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is interesting is that now, because artists really have to do everything for themselves, you have a situation like, you're in the studio working, but one person's got to make sure they get, the shot and the video and everything like that. It's like, how much time do you spend on your social media versus your music?
Yeah, it's horrible but necessary in the sense that, and I think about that all the time too, that even if there's a new band that comes to me or to my son Kane, or even my daughter Chloe as a manager, you're listening to the music, but almost the first thing you do is check out their social media presence.
Yeah.
And part of that is just to know who they are. It's very quickly you can find out who they are, but also part of that is to know how much ambition and get up and go and current world music selling knowledge they have, because making is one thing, selling it's another thing.
Yeah.
And these days, it's just a requirement that or at least we believe it's a requirement for that to happen, that, the artist doesn't have to be taking pictures of his food, but he has to be showing some exciting thing that's going on to engage people on a continuous basis.
Yeah.
But like you're alluding to, all I can think of is what would happen if instead of trying to set up that shot, they were in the next room trying to write a better song, or trying to be a better singer or a better player, or reading philosophy, instead of having to think about how many silly things or artistic things can I do in my day to engage people. What do I think about the philosophies of life? That would lead to better music, one would think. But, I try not to be grumpy old man as well, and it's just the way of the world that they're going to, labels don't even really break artists anymore. They just exploit artists in the sense that if you got something good going on, they can help you sell more of that, possibly.
I don't even suggest artists go with labels anymore, because the whole, what did labels bring? They brought distribution, they brought marketing.
And money.
Money of course, but that money was for basically a tour support, which is marketing.
Yeah, exactly.
Or, but they really don't have that function anymore. Your marketing now is completely online.
Yeah.
Your distribution is online.
It's actually quite amazing that with the artists that I work with and the artists I know, just as friends, I have the mega label artist that I've worked with and done records for and know, and then I have new artists, let's call them, that have no label, pay for everything themselves, have a home studio, record it all themselves, do it themselves, and in many cases, maybe not the Metallicas of the world, but let's take the realistic rock bands of the world versus, or just not rock bands, just any bands, any artist that have label support, but they're only making 20% on their records and they never recoup, versus the guy that sits in his garage and learns how to write and record and do that and do their own videos and get drones and do amazing shots. I have a great friend that goes by the artist name of Witches, who he does it, him and his wife do it completely on their own, and it's amazing. And yeah, his gross numbers are lower than artist A, label artist, but his take-home numbers are way better.
Right.
And he's completely happier because he gets to do everything he wants every day.
Yeah, yeah.
And how much better can life be as an artist or musician to be able to do what you want to do, make the music you want to make,
and own
create the art, own it completely.
Yeah, yeah.
And not serve anybody, not have to have that conversation, that conference call that you didn't hit your second single as well as your first single, and this record needs to go back to the sounds you had 3 records ago because that's the one that sold the most. This guy can just continuously make it up and do anything he wants. That's pure freedom and joy, and you don't got to be a rich man. You don't got to be a Lady Gaga to enjoy life doing that.
No, and that's what I mean by owning it, not necessarily just owning the masters or the publishing or anything like that, but own it. Own what you're putting out there, not have to kowtow to someone else's vision.
He serves
of who
nobody
you should be.
but him.
Yeah,
he does literally every day whatever he wants.
Exactly.
Now, the market might tell you should do this or that, or this song was better. So you're not, and you're not.
You're going to bend to that will
about it.
Yeah, you're going to bend to what sells.
Yeah.
But I mean, look, music has to be commodified in some way for the sake of those who make it. Obviously, that's always been the case. It's not going to change, because that's part of what we do.
Yeah. That's why those people do it.
Yeah.
Everybody talks about not worrying about the commerciality of it, but if you're not worried about the commerciality then why do you ever release it in the first place?
Right.
Just make it at home. Like, you can paint pictures all day long, but once you have an art show, you're worried about what the response is, right?
Right. And
we're
if
not
you're
worried
sell.
about it, but you're hoping for a good response for sales so you can keep on doing it. I mean, music's the same way. I mean, anybody that says they're not concerned about the bottom line, is either independently rich and they don't have to worry about it, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
But most aren't, and most people doing this as a career are learning to live with less. And the wider net you can throw for popularity, the more chances you have of doing this for the rest of your life. And that's what we all want.
And even go beyond the money aspect of it. There's the validation. Every artist wants validation, right? I mean, you want that feeling of, the audience applauding, or people coming up to you and saying, man, I loved your, this song made me, cry, whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's part of why we do this.
Yeah.
If you're not getting that feedback, if you're not getting that positive feedback, even if you're making a whole lot of money, you're not going to be happy as an artist.
Yeah.
You might be happy, to buy a Ferrari or whatever, but
I mean, it's an interesting thing. The things that have given me the most joy, in a sense, from the creations that I've been part of. I mean, I gotta say that the monetary success is amazing, and I'm not going to be ungrateful for that. Wonderful to have a studio like this, and be building another studio like this currently too. So, I mean, those are great things to do. But really, honestly, one of my favorite moments are one of two things. One is being blindsided by something you've done, hearing it in an environment you're not ready for, be it a grocery store, and most of my stuff, like Five Finger Death Punch, is not going to be played in the grocery store. But I have worked on other stuff that I'll be going to pick up my milk, and the chorus, band that I worked with Mud on will come through the speakers, and I go, oh yeah, that wasn't that bad of a song after all. It was pretty good. Or another guy, I remember walking down the aisle, and Simon Collins is another one that I produced. Wasn't a huge seller, but I love those tracks, and it's wonderful to hear it on the playlist. Or something like that, or a football stadium, or since lots of my stuff is more aggressive, it lends itself well to rodeos and athletic events and that sort of thing. But the best thing is when you go to a concert of those bands that I've worked with, and the whole crowd sings a song. And sometimes it's a line that I might have come up with, or like a melody that I came up with. Go, wow, that was an amazing moment. And it's hard to beat that when you got thousands of people singing something you've worked on. Like that's really the best.
That's the payback right there.
Yeah. And the artist gets to see it every night, but I don't.
Yeah.
I go see the one time that they come to town. I go see that show, and then sometimes you're blindsided because you've worked on this stuff, but you haven't really been a part of living it the way the artist has. And it's go, wow, that was amazing.
Yeah. Let's talk about you mentioned Mutt Lange, which obviously you received sort of your tutelage under Mutt. He's got a certain production philosophy, and I've had conversations with other people about this because I don't want to say it's a controversy, but there are perspectives on the role of the producer. I'm big on the idea of pre-production, on working with the artist before they get in here, obviously, so that when they're coming in, they have strong songs, and there's a reason for them to be here, and you're not wasting time because, people are not going to book a 2-month lockout anymore. But there are different philosophies for how you handle the artist, Someone like Mutt Lange, or, there's a few other producers like that too, they have a very characteristic sound. You hear a Mutt Lange track, it's his. Trevor Horn's another one, Jeff Lynne, that's another one. It's
totally.
Like, right away, oh, that's a Jeff Lynne, that kind of thing. Yeah. On the other side, you've got producers who basically the ethos is just do no harm. A producer who basically you look at them and you say, wow, you did this and you did, such different extremes, because the idea that, we're talking earlier about Rick Rubin, there's one who He's not technical at all, but his whole thing is basically just let the artist unfold, let the whole thing unfold. Where do you stand on that?
I mean, what's my opinion of
No, what's your approach?
Way skewed to the Mutt Lange side of things.
Okay.
But, you know, let's start from the top and say there's no rules. There's no, I mean, I listen to records that are live. I listen to records where it's just the band and it's the magic and the beauty of those individual players collectively coming together and didn't have guidance, don't need guidance.
That's the hope.
You know, I'm not judging what's better, what's worse, what will sell more, what won't. All I can judge for is the things that I love listening to. And I love intricacy. I love the ear candy of different things, the stuff that Mutt does, the work that, it's not the work that I love that goes into it, but you listen to any one of, like, if you're using those as examples, if you listen to a Mutt project, you know, everything has been gone over with a fine-tooth comb, and nothing is there that he's not going to allow to be there, and nothing that doesn't serve the end, right? Every drum beat's accounted for, every part, things come in and out, nothing's getting in the way. It's completely a masterclass in what creates popular music for people, what people like, you know? So I'm always going to be for that. Am I more Steely Dan than Sex Pistols? Yeah, I'm Steely Dan all day long.
Okay.
You know, but it's not that I don't like the other. It's not that I can't listen to
just
punk
a different
rock
approach.
and appreciate the adrenaline and the aggression, sometimes the lyrics, that sort of thing. But, you know, I'd just rather listen to Jeff Porcaro play an amazing groove that he's worked his whole life to play than, and no disrespect to anybody, I want to be careful, than just listen to some college kid that had a fun weekend and bashed the drums a little bit and captured some magic that everybody likes for the rest of the time. I mean, I don't discount that. It's just not who I am.
Well, you're sort of playing the odds in a way, right? I mean, the more the more of your production ethos and your technical understanding, not just technical understanding, but your understanding of what makes a great record, what makes a great, whether it's a pop song or whatever, you know.
It's the knowing versus not knowing, and the, you know, with those producers you mentioned, without naming any of them, for some of those producers, some of the great things that they've done or been a part of, let's say at least in name, they've also been a part of a whole bunch of records that didn't work because
fair point.
Sometimes the bands can't do it themselves, or sometimes the bands didn't have the guidance that they needed. To tell a band to go back to the way you felt on the first record, that's a great comment as a producer, but maybe they'll get it, and maybe they can't do that anymore, and they need some help, right? Whereas you take a guy, and I'm going to put Mutt, unfortunately, at the top of that whole, you know, food chain, there was almost nothing he did that didn't succeed.
Absolutely.
And it took him time. It took him a lot longer than the average guy. He wasn't going to do a record in a month, but, you know, up until almost to the end of his career, almost everything he did was pretty darn good and acknowledgeably good.
Oh, yeah.
And selling. The top rock albums of all times are his. And it doesn't matter if it's Back in Black or Hysteria, you know, I mean, those are similar sounding records, but very different records at the same time.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
Or Come On Over, you know, with his wife. I mean, those are different records, but kind of the same records, the same philosophy, the same techniques, the same attention
philosophy.
to detail, right?
Yeah.
But look at those different genres.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, Foreigner, The Cars. I mean, now that's a different, when you're there from the first note to the last master, is a little bit different than just showing up on a Friday and saying, I like that, that, and that, and that needs a better chorus, and, you know.
Sure.
You know, this one you should do a little bit more raw.
Yeah.
You know, as someone who does stuff, like with artists, you know, I just tend not to respect as much. Having said that, the philosophy of music and being an artistry is exceptionally important, and sometimes it is a conversation rather than, you know, me being at the mixing board doing stuff and yelling to the guy how to change his part. You know, sometimes it's like, you know, how are you feeling today? You know, what do you want to accomplish with the song? You know, what's really going on? What are you scared of? You know, all those kinds of things that go into making some great art. It's not, you know, it takes all of that. But the reality is a guy that has a handle on the techniques of recording can also do the philosophy. But the guy that does the philosophy can't do the techniques because he doesn't know how. He has to hire other people. And I think that in the old days, and I say by old days, I mean my earlier days, 70s, the 80s, the 90s, even 90s, started maybe becoming less then. You know, it took a village to record a record at that time, right?
Yes.
It took a lot of people.
Yes.
Right? The producer wasn't engineering generally, and the engineering wasn't doing the legwork that it had his assistant.
Right.
And the assistant wasn't running to get the food, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
And none of them owned the studio, so there was a lot of hands trying to make that, and sometimes the writers weren't involved even on that session. So whereas now, because of the business of music, how it's changed over the years, a lot of times the writer's producing it at home or with the artist, or at least getting enough of a head start that the artist can take it to a producer, and in some cases who just tries to duplicate what the demo was. So really the writer or the artist was producing it ahead of time, right? So it's a, you know, which means, let's say in most of my career, you know, the finances are, I haven't had the budgets that a lot of the previous generation producers had, so I've had to make do with less. So, you know, a lot of times I'm going out, I'm drum teching, I'm changing the heads, you know, my son or my assistant Tristan or someone, you know, it's a smaller group of guys kind of doing it.
Yeah.
And so we need to know more. We just can't sit there and instruct because we don't have the money. I don't even have the money to hire somebody in some of the budgets that I have. So you just got to do what you can on your own, and that's a very Canadian way of doing things, which is why I've been happy that was my upbringing, was because we just didn't have, you know, an excess of people and money. We just had to figure it out.
And also, I think it influences the relationship you have with the artist, because, you know, when you're talking about spending a lot of time with the artist and really being there from, as you say, from, like, you know, the first downbeat all the way through, man, you're getting into that artist's head. You know, you're having a relationship there of, like, you know, sit down and talk to me before you go in there and cut that vocal. Sit down and talk to me about what was in your head when you wrote this, you know, what was your motivation, getting them to this point where they can give you that performance from here, you know, as opposed to just, well, you recorded everything at home and, you know, maybe I'll give you some comments about it or something like that, but you don't get that developing relationship, which I think, you know, makes all the difference. Of that, to me, is the classic role of what the producer should be. You know, the producer should be the fifth Beatle, in a sense, you know, and really getting into the motivation.
I'm always trying to be George Martin.
Right.
But
right.
I'm not him, and, you know, the bands aren't the Beatles.
Yeah,
But we all do the best that we can.
Of course.
And I'm lucky that I've been able to work with bands on multiple records, and on albums, not singles, not songs. You know, I've been lucky, and that's the path that we all choose. You know, some people are so talented they can do, right, you know, they can be part of 4 songs, and all the 4 songs are like these massive hits. And if you got 4 pop hits or 4 #1 country hits, you're living a pretty good life, right?
Sure, yeah.
And in the rock world, it's a little bit, you know, less about that as repetition of album after album and building the catalogs and building the fan base and that sort of thing. So, but I'm lucky because I can work with 12 songs with an act, and, you know, we're not always thinking, well, this has to be for radio or this has to be for that. Some of it is just like, what do you guys want to do? And we know that by the end of it, we got to give the label, you know, 3-4 songs that they can do a video for and put to radio. But if in the meantime you want to do a 6-minute song, let's do it. You know, if it makes you happy, or you want to do 4 ballads instead of 1 ballad, I mean, we can do that as long as we cover all the bases for the business of music. But as part of that process, I get to know the guys really well, and particularly the singers.
Of course.
So, you know, I can tell you, you know, they'd be the first to tell you I know a lot of their secrets, and I like knowing people. I like the relationships that I have, and I like doing multiple records. One band I did 8 records with, another band 6 albums with. That's because we can build that trust, and that's because I legitimately care. I'm not just going, okay, well, I got you till 5, so let's do what we can. It's like, if we don't get it done by 5, we'll stay till 7, and then if we don't get it done by 7, we'll stay till midnight, and if we don't get it done then, we'll come back tomorrow, right? So it's a little different kind of philosophy, and because of that, I have, those people are still in my lives, or still peripherally around me in different ways, and some of them moved to Vegas here too. It's crazy. We were just talking about the amount of artists and people that have been moving to Vegas over the last 10 years.
I'm blown away. Every day I meet new people here. I was like, wow, you live here?
And you told me people that were here that I didn't even know were here. My realtor yesterday told me this rock star that I know, that he didn't know I knew him, but he said, yeah, I just sold a house to this guy. I go, I know that guy. He's here? It's crazy. So, but luckily I have a lot of the people I worked with do live in town now, and they didn't live in town when we first started working with each other, but to get to Vegas, see what a great city it is, and spend enough time here making albums that they say that they decide, hey, that's a great place to live.
Well, particularly if you're an LA refugee, because this is essentially a suburb.
It is
to a certain extent. I mean,
it's a flying suburb, less than an hour, and you're here.
I have said to people, a lot of times I drive to LA. I can spend 4 hours driving from here to LA. I could spend 4 hours just getting from LA to LA.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I mean, it's.
And we've done that. So.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. We were talking about the industry and how that's changed. Now, as a studio owner, obviously, you kind of saw that coming, and yet you still signed on for being a studio owner.
Yeah. Well, kind of.
Okay. Or did you just, tell me about that a little bit.
Well, I didn't sign on to being a studio owner as much as I needed a bag of tools in order to build a house.
But this is an expensive bag of tools.
It's an expensive bag of tools, but, I didn't necessarily need this bag of tools, but it worked out that it was available. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I didn't buy the studio to own a studio. I needed a studio, and rather than rent one from somebody else, I thought I might as well own it.
Sure.
And obviously didn't start here. Worked out, just like everybody, worked out of my house. I used to rent this studio when I first started out in Vegas. That was 2005 when I got here, and I was doing a record in my house. And the guys were going to be on Guitar Player magazine, so they needed to take some photos, and didn't feel like it was a cool thing to be taking pictures in my living room. So we rented this place, to do the pictures. Mm-hmm. And in the end, I owned it, and that band came back here to record. So it was like a full circle kind of thing where we pretended we were here, and then we were eventually here. But now having, because this is kind of the first commercial studio that I've had, right? Uh-huh. And it is, although I've worked in them all my lives, well, maybe my lives, I don't know. But definitely this life. Mm-hmm. So I've worked in, commercial studios around the world, so I certainly knew where I felt comfortable and where I didn't, and what makes people want to go there and what makes them not. So,
and you've done that here, by the way. I mean, the vibe here is great.
Thanks.
It's really good for creativity.
Thanks,
it's you have obviously taken a page from several really great studios.
It's wonderful because I have a great staff, as you know.
You do, yeah.
And Zoe Thrall, a good friend of yours too. I mean, we wouldn't be the same without her, and my daughter works here too. So it's a family environment, and some engineers have been here before me. Mm-hmm. I inherited one, hired another one on my first day. They're still here. So I mean, it's a great group of people, and that's part of the magic of coming here. Is that
of course
that's important.
It's all about your people.
And lots of times it does come from the top down, right?
Yeah.
But anyways, what I should say, it's more about them these days than me, because I'm not here as much anymore. And if I am here, I'm working, so it's really about the staff that makes it as great as it is. But from all those years of working around the world in studios, you kind of get a feel for it. And I saw, I'm lucky enough to see all the different stages. So I kind of got to see the glory years of everything. I wasn't around for the 4-track days, the 4-track tape machine. I mean, I was for the 4-track cassette. My first recorder was a Tascam 244, which was
Mine was a 3340.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
So, but I grew up in analog days, tape.
Yeah.
My first little sort of college course I ever took was how to align a 24-track and that sort of thing.
MTR 90. My first gig was Cherokee.
Oh, okay.
So 4 A ranges and a shit ton of MTR 90s.
Right.
Every morning. That was how I started my day. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I grew up in that, and then transitioned as soon as Pro Tools was happening. Before Pro Tools, Sound Designer, the various other incarnations. As a stereo. In the early days, we just used it to be able to automate our mixes.
Yeah.
I didn't have an SSL. I had a Soundcraft 200B, and you'd record to the end or mix
Great
the end
console,
of the verse.
Man. Yeah.
Butt it up with the chorus that you mix later. And,
right.
But that led to the Pro Tools, the first 4-track Pro Tools system, and then I saw that come into being, and the complaints about that and the evolution of that until now. Tapes wasn't a thing, and now it's kind of coming back. We talked about a little bit more people are trying to record through it, but I got to see that whole process in the studio process too. So, and even now, rooms like this, in a sense, are fewer and far between.
Yeah.
Because bands you don't have Fleetwood Mac booking this place up for a year.
Yep.
The Eagles or any of those bands that would kind of book.
You're talking about Hysteria. I mean,
technically, I think it was 4 years, not 4 years with Mutt, but 4 years.
Actually, I'll tell you a funny story about that. My friend Robert Scoville worked with them for quite a while, and he was telling me that one day they were in the studio, and one of them came in, and he was kind of down and depressed, and said, what's going on? He said, I just realized we've been working on this album longer than Cream's entire career.
Oh my God.
Ow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was a great record.
But it was worth it, obviously,
Yeah, I've definitely had some of those moments too. But
yeah, of course. But one of the things that you have here that has become increasingly rare is the multi-room concept.
Yeah.
And that, again, we both grew up on that, and the idea of chance meetings between people because they happen to be in the same studio at the same time. You don't get a lot of that anymore.
Well, that's interesting because generally I'm pretty private, and I don't like. I can be social, but that's not by choice always, right? Mm. But having a multi-room studio is really quite fantastic, and I know that Mutt used to like it too because you go to the kitchen for a coffee, a drink, or whatever, and you see someone else, and you have to say something.
Yeah.
At that point, you're forced into talking, and. Lots of times it turns into great conversations, and not just musical conversations, but life conversations. And
talk about cars or whatever. Yeah.
Gives you a little bit of a lift or a little change. You go back to your studio, your session, and it's helpful. And I think that's great. And honestly, like the evolutions of studios now, I have some further ideas of how they can even be more modern and up to date. Plus, taking advantage of a room like this where there's 5 rooms, 5 ISO rooms, lines of sight. That doesn't really get built that much anymore, right? You almost have to inherit that or be very rich just as a hobby. But, I try never to be grumpy old man. I try to be only, well, what's the good that can come of this? And the reality now, lots of people are recording music on the laptops, but they have bad listening environments, they have bad isolation environments. Why can't they bring their laptop, slide it into a workstation, and end up with this instantly, without having to make sure we got all the plugins, without having to not have connectivity.
Yeah.
Lots of sort of people that start at home are frustrated in a larger studio because generally things take a little bit longer unless you're part of the program. But bigger studios, if they want to survive, have to be able to accommodate those kind of people because people are doing great work at home. You have a Billie Eilish album that sounds amazing and is a great work of art, and lots of it was done at home.
Sure.
They should be able to bring, or even myself, I do stuff at home too. I should be able to bring my laptop, slide it in, connect to USB, and away we go.
That's true.
As simple as that, and still take advantage of the vintage microphones. And you want to do a band thing, you can have the band set up here at the same time quickly and easily without having to take a half-day setup. and realize you don't have the connectors to connect to it. I mean, I understand some of their frustrations, you know, because we get caught in the professional world, let's call it, of studios, and it's done a certain way.
And you have certain expectations.
And in the old days, someone brings your laptop in and you kind of roll your eyes, here we go. But really, that's the way of the world now. So, you know, if someone wants to use Ableton to create their loops and whatever, let's hook them up and let's get it done and make it as easy and flawless as you can. And even if someone just wants to take advantage of the mics, they should be able to just bring their system in here and look at the mic list, you know, 251, whatever they want, you know, C800.
Yeah.
Ask for it. It's there. It's set up, ready to go, and it's a beautiful thing. It instantly sounds good, and it was painless.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you can have 7 rooms instead of 4 rooms, or have 2 big rooms and then 5 smaller rooms.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, you know,
we'll see where it goes.
You know, it's interesting because now I hear a lot about, you know, with Atmos coming in, for example, you've got now companies like Sony who are doing things like, we're going to scan your head, and then we're going to give you a pair of cans, and you're going to be able to put those on, and you're going to be able to be mixing in whatever room you want to be in, you know, the room you're accustomed to. And that's an interesting concept, but, you know, again, we're kind of removing ourselves from the reality of the process, you know? And, you know, I mean, yeah, okay, I'll sound like a grumpy old guy too here, but, you know, that to me, that idea of going into the studio to work and to focus on that, that's a part of the process, you know? And if you're doing that at home, you know, I did a panel a couple of years ago with a bunch of different studio managers, you know, talking about like when you wouldn't want to necessarily have a commercial space. I called the panel "Get a Room," right? Yeah. And one of the people on the panel is my old friend Paula Salvatore. And Paula, you know, managed Capitol for years, and, you know, and she said, you know, she said the same thing, you know, even people who are working at home, if you're working at home, you know, you don't have that same kind of motivation, you know, as she put it, you know, I could work on this tune right now, or I could go have an English muffin. You know, I mean, it's goofy, but it's true, you know? I mean, it's like, if you're here, you're here to work.
Muffin here, too.
Well,
not only that, Postmates will bring it to you now, too.
Ooh,
so
yeah, that's true.
Now you don't even have to have food staff.
Yeah, fair point.
But I get what she was saying.
Yeah, it's like if you're coming in to work, you're going to work, you know, and there is a certain motivation there. I think.
There's definitely what people have told me, and again, I've had home studios for years, and I've had this place for years, and everything in between. And people tell me when they come here, just the smell of the studio, the environment, the excitement of coming in here, blocking off all your calls so you can just concentrate on you're paying all this money for studio time. You don't want to have to waste it on the phone.
Right.
Your wife's definitely not asking you to go for, you know, milk and bread, you know, in the middle of your day.
Right.
I'm not saying that happens, but if it did happen, I mean, it could be the other way around too.
Yeah,
and,
of course.
You know, you're the husband's not asking you to go for, you know,
sure.
Not saying.
But point being that you're focused on your work.
Yeah, you come here and you're focused, right? And again, not just focused for yourself, but with other people around you as well. Everybody's striving for the same goal. So I definitely agree with what she's saying. But at the same time, there is sort of a magic that happens, the luxury of a really comfortable environment. I think that should be the goal, is that couch, those 2 couches over there. You know, you should be able to lie down there and have a nap if you want to, too.
Yeah.
A lot of things happen from the sleep process as well.
Sure.
You know, right after you wake up. So it should be just as comfortable in here. But, you know, again, there's just no rules. I mean, it's going to be different. It's going to be different both ways. But
every project, every artist is going to be different.
And it depends on your home environment, too. Like, I think when I think of home studio, I think, you know, legitimate home studio. Double doors, sealed, and once you go in there, it's almost locked on the outside, and nobody bothers you till you come out. If your home studio is the office besides where the kids are playing.
Right. If your home studio is your laptop on the dining room table.
Not the same.
Exactly. You know? Exactly. But, you know, you're going to work however you work.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. There was an artist who I had done some work with, and, you know, we had talked about that, you know, we were at Cherokee, and we're working on something, and I said, you know, he said, you know, my vocal just isn't what I really, you know, doesn't give me the same energy as the demo. And, we talked about it. So, how are you recording your demo? Well, after the kids go to bed, I go down in the basement, and this is what I did. I said, you know what? Let's take a 2-track, let's just dub some stuff down to a 2-track cassette, take it home to your Porta studio, and do the vocal there. And yeah, the vocal's not going to it's not going to sound as great, but if that's the energy that you need, so be it.
And, a lot of us have had to chase demos.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's the magic of the creation point, I find.
It is.
So that's why, this is not an old school thing. This is a more modern day, philosophy. But I haven't done pre-production since like 1999.
Interesting.
Because to me, that's wasting the moment. That's so wasting the moment. Even if you got to have the whole band in here, if it's a band thing, if it's not a band thing, and then it's you and the artist or whatever. But who's ever here, sometimes when you create, change that chorus, write that lyric, do a sample melody, try a new thing, you nailed it on the first time or the second time, and then at that point, even if tape was rolling, you got to remember you did it at that point if you want to reference it. And 3 months later, when the studio time is booked, then you got to be able to do it just as well with the same naivety in a certain sense and the same freshness.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing. It's also a beautiful thing to go on the road for 2 years and know the stuff really well and come in and do it. And that's why I say there's no rules. But I would rather have the option. If someone did it right, why have to do it again?
Yeah. Well, we were talking earlier about Vance Powell.
Right.
And, when he works with Chris Stapleton, he's basically, he's the way he put it to me was, I say, put in record first and then set up the mics. Because, you never know when that magic moment's going to hit.
Yeah.
And, it could very well hit on that 4-track demo, whatever,
You don't want to miss it for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
We're all trying to capture that magic. It's on us if we had it and we didn't keep it.
Yeah.
So, and that's why it's like for me, for my projects, that's why I incorporate this time, the recording studio. Let's say I don't do pre-production, but let's also say pre-production is part of the recording process.
Sure.
So if we're writing the song, or we're fixing the song, or we're practicing the song, and we get it right, it's done. But it still doesn't mean we can't come back to it 3 months later and say, okay, well, let's just try that again, and maybe we can do it better. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But at least you have the choice of either one of those, or taking your original vocal and putting it on a better track or something. There's just no rules these days anymore. And depending on how much, depending on your commitment to organicness, if that's the word, you can plop this over there and put that over there and do different versions of stuff. And, sometimes for me, the fun is being the mad scientist,
Yeah.
on the computer keyboard too, not just at the console, just, being able to try, and the artist being there too and trying different things. And, so I never want to limit it to an old school philosophy of, well, that's not how you do it.
Right, right, of course.
I mean, I used to have label people calling me, so when you start in the pre-production? Oh, I don't do that. What? Instant lack of faith in me from that point on.
Sure.
Until they get the result.
Yeah.
But, then you have to explain, well, yeah, in the old days you'd do that for 3 months, you'd practice with the band, but the band's not bringing in finished songs anymore. They're concentrating on the social media.
And that goes back to what we were talking about before. It's funny you mentioned that because, when we were talking about getting into the artist's head, for example, there's this philosophy of, should the whole thing be one take? You were talking earlier about Phineas,
Yeah.
And Phineas is a mad genius who can take, 450 different vocal takes and cut it to the syllable and get a believable vocal.
Yeah.
On the other side of that, you've got people who want to do the whole thing as one contiguous performance. As you say, there's no right or wrong. There's no, do I believe it? That's my whole thing, It's like, if I listen to your performance, I don't care if you used auto-tune, I don't care if it's microtonal here and there, do I believe you?
Yeah.
Does that song touch me in that place, where it should?
And I would compare that to making movies too.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I mean, I think it's a weird anomaly, or just a weird thing. Period. That it seems like people, and not just fans, but technical staff, let's call them producers, songwriters, whatever, everybody can have such a distinct idea of good and bad and what should and shouldn't be. But when it comes to movies, you can go see a Western, you can go see a sci-fi movie, you can go see, a black and white movie, you can go see a slice of life independent movie that makes you feel violated by the time that you're done. And you're not saying one of those is better than the other. You're just watching them. Do I like it? Do I not like it? And you can like all those things and still live with yourself at the end of the day. Whereas it seems like now, first of all, was the analog to digital argument.
Oh God.
And then, and now it's like, well, was it one take? Was it organic? I mean, who cares? I think exactly what you're saying is, do you believe it? And more importantly, does it affect you?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really for me, the only requirement for music. And that's what I look at it at the end of the day is not any of the particulars. And it's different for different people. I can play a track that I worked on, and my daughter's going to hate it, and my son's going to love it.
Yeah,
right?
of course.
So
of course.
It's not like there's one rule for everybody, but can it affect people a certain way? And if it does, it doesn't matter how it was created. If the guy had to punch in or the guy didn't have to punch in. Yeah, I mean, we know generally what we like to hear, and generally we can, you or I could tell how produced it was. But to say music is less valuable because they spent more time sanding some of the edges off is silly to me. And just as the other way around too, to say something isn't valuable because they didn't spend any time sanding the edges and putting a little bit of paint on it. I mean, that's just as silly too, because it's really how did it affect me.
Yeah.
And it's so weird to me because I like to make music a certain way. And I like to listen to lots of that music. We just talked about stuff like Steely Dan and whatever. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I'm just as happy putting on something that the singer's singing out of tune. It probably was one take from start until end.
Yep.
The guitar's not even in tune.
Yep.
But I'm getting it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm feeling it. And I like the point. I like the lyric. I'm listening to the lyric now instead of listening to the intricacies of how the jigsaw puzzle of production actually fits into it. So for me, I look at it like that, more from it really isn't right or wrong. It just doesn't affect me or not. And because of that, sometimes music that people love, I don't love.
And vice versa.
Yeah,
yeah, of course.
But I'm not judging. I'm just saying it's not for me. I mean, I don't get anything from that. I don't understand that.
Right, right. Well, it's interesting that you brought up movies because, I had a conversation recently with a friend about the idea that a lot of times, I've talked to like recording students, and I've said, go get into like Kurosawa, watch, study great directors, because what are we doing? We're telling stories.
Yeah.
And if you know how to tell a perfect story, whether it's a great lyric or whatever, man, some of the best lyrics are those that leave a lot to the imagination. I was talking to somebody about this the other day. We were talking about...
Or the lyrics where you can interpret it any way you want.
Exactly. The song...
Which is leaving it up to the imagination, so I shouldn't have even said that.
Well, but that's...
You're right.
No, but you're absolutely right. I was talking to somebody the other day about the song Tempted. By Squeeze.
The Squeeze song, yeah.
Yeah. The opening
That's
lines to that.
Yeah.
The opening line to that is like setting a play, man.
Yeah.
I bought a toothbrush, and I got in my car and I drove, The whole point of that is like, by the time he's into like the middle of that verse, you've got this mental picture.
Yeah.
And your mental picture is going to be different than mine.
Yeah.
But it sets a stage, and that's a whole lot more creative, I think, in certain ways. And again, it's like...
Yeah. No, I mean, just... And again, lots of that music of that time period, even songs like, The Police, if you go like da do 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 da da da.
Right.
I mean, obviously that in itself can be interpreted to be anything, but I interpreted it differently when I was 18 and listening to it than I interpret it now.
Oh, yeah.
I understand it in a whole different way now, and that's always a wonderful thing too, where the meaning can change over time to you. That's really the music that can stay abreast with your life and can become the soundtrack of your life, when you can have that Eagles song and it means different, you know, Hotel California, say, would mean different now to me.
Oh, hell yeah.
Than it meant then.
Sure.
You know?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And now I know I can never leave here.
You're going to rename the studio now?
No, but that's one of my favorite songs of all time.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
that never gets old. I can keep hitting play on that one for the rest of my life. Every time I think I've had enough, I wake up the next day and play it again. I mean, not every day, but.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, but you mentioned something that I thought was interesting earlier. You said, you know, you're kind of a private person. And yet, I think by the nature of what you do, you have to be kind of extroverted to a certain extent, because you have to be able to relate to people, and you have to be able to meet them where they are. Yeah. I think that, because at least to me, you know, the role of producer is really this bridge between, you know, the technical and the creative. And if you don't know how to reach that person on a psychological basis and communicate with them to be able to get that out of them, you're not going to make that deep dive with them.
Yeah, I think in many ways they can be two different things. So one thing that you said was, my job, you didn't say this, but I'm going to interpret it like this. My job is to get that out of them, to know the artist, to know what they want to say, help them say it as good as they possibly can, to as many people as they possibly can.
Right.
That's probably what I'd say that my job is, right?
Yeah,
and if
fair.
I'm introverted by nature, when I'm doing my job, I have to switch. I have to change person.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't have to change my philosophies or my meaning of my life, but I have to be able to, because lots of artists are more introverted than me. So then I got to bring one introvert trying to bring another one out.
That's it.
And that can be tiring.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
But it's also, I think, beyond that, even if people are introverted, that's a little bit of a deceiving word, because it's really how interested you are in the other person. Even if you're introverted, you can still have great conversations because you're just freaking interested.
Yeah.
Being extroverted, to me, just means you can say nothing all day and do nothing all day and have a great time, and you're happy to be part of the party. Maybe being introverted means you kind of only want to get involved if there's more meaning attached to it for you. You know, you have a certain amount of resources, emotional resources, spiritual resources, and you're only going to spend them when you feel like you're getting a payback. I mean, I'm just making this up on the spot, so I'm probably completely wrong.
No. I think you're going exactly where I think.
But even if you're two introverts, let's say, I still might be extremely engaged and just legitimately interested in that artist, or they might be interested in what we're doing with their song. That it doesn't matter at that point.
I think in certain ways it's even more likely that you're going to then, have a meeting of the minds in a sense,
And if I got 4 introverts in a band across meeting with me, that gets even a little trickier, but you feed off each other. So
sure.
All you got to do sometimes is get the party started, and it'll take care of itself, right? So giving a good, safe environment for people to be able to say what they want to say and explore the things they want to explore. And that's also part of your job, and in many ways, the easiest part, right?
Well, it's funny. So I do a lot of work with artists who deal with what we call neurodiversity issues, right?
Okay.
Which is pretty much every artist you know.
Yeah.
I mean, we're all out there somewhere on the spectrum. Otherwise, we wouldn't be artists,
Right.
But
I've been accused.
as have we all. I maintain that we all are. It's just that we weren't diagnosed when we were younger.
Right.
That's all.
I don't want to cut you off because I want you to ask me the question. So get back to your question. But what I will say about that whole thing is this: I also, you're not wrong in what you're saying, but I also believe that it's just unimportant.
It is.
Diagnose. So
Absolutely.
now we're giving myself a title, some other people titles, some identities that they didn't necessarily need to have. We're all just a little bit off or a little bit different in different ways, and that's a wonderful, beautiful, interesting thing.
Well, to your point.
Okay.
I hate the labels. I hate the label neurodiversity. I hate ADHD and stuff like that. Yeah. And in fact, I started a nonprofit that I call the Artist Brain Collective, because my whole thing is, no, man, you have artist brain.
Right.
You know, whatever that is, whatever that means, it's just,
Right.
you know, we're very sensitive, we're attuned to things on a different level than your average person, shall we say. Yeah. But I think it is interesting to approach it from that perspective, because we realize that in being that way, whatever that way is, you know, in being highly sensitive, highly attuned to certain things, that we approach communication differently. And I find it interesting, and I'm definitely interested in your take on this, because as you say, you've been through sort of multiple generations of creatives. I find, and I'm interested in your opinion on this too, but I find that the ability to communicate is almost a little bit different now, because a lot of artists, and I don't want to call them introverted, I want to call them more just having less experience in this one-to-one communication with other people. You really have to kind of pin them down, and like, how do you get into the head of an artist now? Does it change? Has it changed from maybe 20, 30 years ago for you?
Well, I think mostly the communication is a matter of making, first of all, two things. Probably one, a matter of the person respecting you, and a matter of them feeling safe to be respected themselves. And it's not just mutual respect. It's also, you know, I've definitely had different clients, or even not necessarily clients I've worked with, but people that have come here to visit me or something like that, write songs with, who, yeah, sometimes it does feel like you're pulling teeth to just get it out of them.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just got to do something goofy, or you got to show them that, you know, we're all here for a good time, you know. And sometimes it's the opposite, where you got to make them feel you're taking their subject matter really serious. It's a serious thing that we're writing a song about. So you know, I mean, it's a matter of reading, you know, reading the person of what can make them be productive.
Yeah.
And I'm not even going to say to come out of their shell, because that's not my goal, is not to change their personality. My goal is to help them create some great art. But if you're talking about the different personalities, yeah, it's different, but honestly, I still find at the end of the day, once people are comfortable, it's still all kind of the same. It's a little tricky at first, especially if there's an age difference, especially if there's an economic difference, especially if someone comes from a different lifestyle, whole different life than what you are, you know, and they're used to people, you know, not treating them well. And because don't forget, you know, my clients are one thing, but the studio has clients. Like, the studio has way more clients than I'll ever have. So I get to meet a lot of different people that I normally would never, a lot of artists that I normally never would, in my kitchen, at the front door, taking out the garbage.
Fair point. Yeah.
I mean, we got guys calling from jail trying to book their studio time for their rap, right? Because they've been in jail for how long, and they got it all written down, and the first thing they want to do is come here.
Cool.
That's a different kind of person, or well, probably not too much of a different kind, not always a different kind of person, but different kind of agenda that they have, and they're used to, look, they've just been in jail, being treated a certain way for, depending on how long they've been in there. So they don't know how you're going to treat them. But once you treat them fairly and honestly, and don't expect, you know, something, and don't judge them prematurely, then they're just kind of people. And, you know, I'm just using that as an example, but it could be some other dude that pulls up in a Bentley who then expects to be treated a certain way. But once you kind of don't treat him the certain way that he expects you to, sometimes that can reap rewards too, in the sense that, you know, we're just here, people making music. It doesn't matter who, where, from where, you know, color, financial bracket. I mean, we're all kind of equal in this zone, where we can all either write something really great or write something really bad.
Well, and I've found that is, in a certain sense, that's one of the ingredients in the secret sauce of having a great creative relationship, is like, I'm not going to give you, I'm not going to speak down to you. I'm not going to speak up to you. You know, you're a peer, and you're a peer whether you're, you know, whether you're Ringo or whether you're, you know, Joe Unknown. We're still in this together and creating something together.
Yeah.
And therefore we have to be at a certain level of communication.
Yeah. 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 I think that's really true and just really important. And sometimes if I look back at the successes and failures that I've had, and it's always important to try to remember where you succeeded and where you didn't.
Oh yeah.
You know, the times I didn't is the times where I thought I knew it all. And honestly, I may have known it all, but I didn't because I didn't get anything good done.
Yeah.
So how much did I know? Nothing. I should have known how to handle that session better, that artist better, that song better, and been more collaborative and reactive to it instead of, you know, too alpha doggish.
Well, and we do tend to do that. You know, we tend to just judge the situation, and sometimes inaccurately, as you say. Yeah.
And vice versa too. If I've been too quiet because I don't think my ideas are good, or if the guys, you know, I mean, I grew up in a very diverse musical family, and was basically on the road playing in bands from the time I was like 14 years old. So worked with a lot of different musicians and hung with a lot of different people, and most of them were better than me. So, you know, I learned to be quiet until, you know, there was a point for me to be saying anything or to be playing or whatever it was. But that underconfidence, I think, has served me well, because generally I'm always learning instead of teaching. Until I got to be a producer, then it's a whole different kind of philosophy, because then it's your job to help people be better, right? So, you know, sometimes I'm underconfident too, and I should probably be more dominant and say that's not going to work.
Well, and there, you know, you go back to what you were talking about earlier about reading the room, you know? I mean,
for sure.
What does this particular situation need?
And that's what an autistic person can't do always, is read the room.
Yes.
So does that mean you're not autistic if you can read the room? If you're extra sensitive?
I don't know, man.
Right?
You know, I mean, I have always felt that the whole, as you say, the whole autistic label is you know, I mean, first of all, yes, it does give us the ability to categorize certain things and find some certain commonalities and stuff. That's kind of cool sometimes. But it also really does pigeonhole you in terms of, well, if you've got ADHD, then I know what you need to do to, you know.
Yeah.
No, you know, even the most autistic person in the world shines at something, right? Like, you know, I remember seeing this story about this one guy who was severely autistic, nonverbal and everything, went up in a helicopter over the New York City skyline, and then they put him in front of this big sheet of paper and he drew the entire thing from memory.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
That's
amazing.
Every autistic or whatever, you know, every person who is somewhere on that spectrum, read 99 point something of us all, has some particular area in which they're going to shine at some particular time.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, you may be the most, you know, the most heavily, you know, nonverbal person in the world, but at some point, something's going to pull it out of you.
Yeah.
You know, and you're going to be able to relate to somebody on a level that nobody else does.
You know, I really like to think that people have, you know, this is a very basic metaphor, and it's a video game, like simulation. We won't get into simulation talks of the world and that sort of thing, but let's just say this is like that in the sense that we all get born with 100 points and we distribute them the way that we want. And some of us put more into beauty, and some of us put more into intellectualism, and some of us put more into, you know, whatever it is.
Right.
You know, and maybe autistic people in particular have less, you know, in the social skills and whatever, and communication, but that just means they're heavily weighted in other areas. And so that's my version of equality, because you can't say that on the surface that people are all equal, because some are smarter, some are better looking, some are faster, some are shorter, some are taller, but in general, the sum total of everybody is probably the same.
That 100 points.
You know what I mean? Yeah, that 100 points. And it's been distributed a certain way. So when you find someone deficient in some areas, that's okay, because that guy's going to be good at doing other things. And, you know, just think of all the people we need in life, you know, to not be too smart or too stupid, or, you know, we need everything from plumbers to scientists. Not saying that that's a judgment of either of those positions, because they're completely necessary.
Yeah.
And sometimes the guy digging the ditch has more smarts for certain things than the scientist than Einstein, who's just frickin' doing calculations and is not even aware that the rats are running.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying that that's what he did, but
you
get my point, right?
Exactly.
You know, so you know that's really the thing that gets me through life and helps me, you know, hopefully gives me understanding from other people and helps me to understand them. You know, look, we all got different amounts of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not perfect, you're not perfect, but we're all perfect in the sense we all got 100 points.
We are, absolutely. And I believe that.
I gotta start thinking about these things ahead of time, because I'm not sure that made complete sense, but...
You know what? It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know, that's the reason I don't script this shit.
I didn't get enough points in the making sense part.
I don't script this shit for a reason, okay? You know?
You'll be regretting this in the end.
No, I won't. No, I won't. Believe me, I've had more interesting things to edit than this. This is like, I will probably do very minimal editing to this one.
Right. Are you going to edit out you talking about doing the editing?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know.
So I'm going to say something later to see if you edited out the editing word.
Knock yourself out, man.
Okay,
you know, whatever works. Now you were talking a minute ago about your upbringing. I know you grew up in a musical family. You were on the road for a long, long time. You've been a performer for a large part of your life. Talk to me about imposter syndrome, because you are constantly confronted with other artists who you have to address that in.
Yeah.
You experience it yourself?
You know, imposter syndrome is really interesting to me because, I mean, it's hard to believe the people that have that have done such great things and still feel like they're the imposter. But, you know, I had a great friend of mine one time. I haven't seen the Far Side comic, but he was talking to me about this Far Side comic, and it was the picture of a cockroach in the alley, you know, with a paper bag of wine on Skid Row kind of thing, you know, clearly on, you know, the downward spiral, talking to the guy next to him. And he says, yeah, I had it all, an office on the 50th floor and all the money he could want and all the women at my feet. And then somebody walked into my office one day and said, wait a minute, you're just a cockroach. And that's really the definition of imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Not to get caught up in what people think of you. So, I mean, personally, you know, this is almost an egotistical thing to say, but I've never felt that too much because I was always focused from the start doing what I was doing because I was on the road at a young age. So nobody could tell me I was pretending to play in a band at home in the garage because I was out there in the club playing in the band. Mm-hmm. Might not have been the great band, but it was a band, and I was doing it, and I was getting better, and then started the studio thing. And but you know, I guess there's always still an element of thinking that, you know, you're maybe looked at as being better than you really are. You're really not that good and you're fooling people. I guess I've had a couple times where I thought, boy, I got out of that one easy because, you know, they thought he had something good. But the artist, you know, it's a weird artistry, the artists that I have to deal with at least, are a weird combination of overconfidence, whether that's false, whether that's a reaction of being insecure.
Yeah.
I don't know. In some cases it is.
Of course it is. Yeah.
And they're all, and at the same time, you know, none of them know how great that they really are. So, you know, I guess they all.
That's our job.
I mean, artists have that all the time. But I really don't think about it because it just is. And even, you know, I've had very close people to me tell me that they quit a job because they just didn't think they were qualified to do it. And then you have the other side of society that says fake it till you make it.
Yep.
I'd always almost rather go with the fake it till you make it because you eventually will know it. You know, like even engineers, when they come here to work, a lot of times they get out of school and they think they know stuff, and then they come here and they go, oh, I don't really know anything. Well, they're not necessarily an imposter. They're just on their path to learning it, and if they stick it out, they'll feel less like an imposter and feel more qualified.
Sure. I mean, you know, I'm remembering for myself, for example, the first time I was asked to come and produce an artist in the studio. And I thought, you know, I don't really know what I'm doing, you know? And I found myself basically doing what I thought I should be doing, which was, you're asking me to be here to be your creative collaborator in a sense, right? And I said, I went through the whole session thinking like, I hope I'm doing this right. I have no idea. And, I was, the artist thanked me and said, oh, this was wonderful. And I thought, oh shit, I did it right, but there's this feeling of like, do I really know what I'm doing? And I think because there's so much nebulousness. Yeah. I don't know if that's a word, but
I think in my case, I had a lot of positive reinforcement growing up as a kid with my parents who encouraged me to leave school to be a musician. That doesn't
that's
happen
unusual.
much.
That's unusual.
So I always have found that almost the opposite. I've overreached. And then that's okay though, because I don't have to be an imposter because I understand that I'm overreaching.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm that guy. I'm saying I want to be that guy. I'm going to try to do it, knowing that I got a lot to learn, but I'll figure it out.
Yep.
So I guess I accept that I'm the imposter till I'm not. But even then, once you're not the imposter there, you're the imposter. It never stops. You never stop learning and growing and trying different things. At least I think in a exciting life, you're always doing something new.
I agree. And that's part of leading an artistic life, I think, too. But you just put your finger on something really. I have said this to someone recently. We were talking about imposter syndrome as being I have no idea what I'm doing, and people are going to figure it out that I have no idea what I'm doing, as opposed to what you just said, which is, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm going to figure it out.
I'm at peace knowing I don't know what
I'm
doing.
Right.
And I think, obviously, if you're trying to keep a job, you don't want them to know that. But at the same time, I think it's in a sense a humble way of betterment of yourself. And I think even that artist or whatever job it is, I think they'd rather have someone really passionate about what they're about to start doing, who's going to get better, than someone who doesn't think they're an imposter and who thinks they're amazing and probably doesn't do a good job.
And doesn't know what they don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. By thinking you know everything, you really don't. Do I know? It's funny because I'm sure you've heard the same thing. I'll take people on tours here, and do you know what every one of those buttons does? Will be the question from somebody that doesn't know that they're mostly all the same.
Right.
Tracks all the way across. But sometimes I kind of think twice about that. Do I really know what all those buttons do? And yeah, I do, but there's a certain combination of attack and release that I might not know that it does. I might not know what it all does,
Actually, someone asked me that one time.
Faster attack, slower attack. I'd have to read it and make sure it's a faster attack if I pull it,
Oh yeah. Well, somebody asked me that one time. We were in front of a 96 channel console, and somebody said to me, "Do you really know what all those buttons is?"
Yeah.
I happened to think fast that day. I don't know, and I said, "Yeah, I'll accept this one right here."
I'm going to use that definitely because,
feel
when
free.
you first look at it, it looks pretty overwhelming.
It does.
But once you compartmentalize it, it's hardly anything.
Just this, all right, so let me wrap with a question I usually tend to ask people.
Okay.
The industry has changed, as we say. Your role in the industry has changed. The artists that you work with have changed, or their priorities. What do you tell 15-year-old you coming up now?
When I was 15, I just bought my first Tascam 244.
All right.
Yeah, I think I'd say, you have no idea what's coming. Good luck with that.
Oh, are you in trouble?
It's not too late to change careers now. I would say just don't worry about nothing.
It's a double negative.
Don't worry. Oh my God. We got to worry about everything. No, I'd say, I would say my own 15-year-old self or any 15-year-old, do what you're passionate about and keep on doing it until someone tells you can't. And probably nobody will.
Probably not.
And if you're doing what you want, what more could you ask in life?
Fair point.
Easy as that.
I like that. Kevin Churko, thank you for being my guest.
Right. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for being interested and interesting.
Ooh. Whoa. Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.